Thanks for tuning into this episode of the Human Performance Outliers podcast with Zach Bitter. Alright, everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Human Performance Outliers podcast. I'm your host, Zach Bitter, and I want to welcome everyone to this episode of the show. As a way to thank the listeners for helping me grow this podcast over the years, I'm going to continue a raffle option for all of you to have a chance to win a free consultation with me. So it's a 30-minute consultation that I will raffle off once per month. All you have to do to enter is share the episodes that you enjoy on whatever platform you find most interesting. The only thing I ask you to do is, if it's a social media channel, make sure you tag me so I see it and can save that and enter in the raffle. Or if it's somewhere else that you can't tag me at, take a screenshot and send that to me at hpopodcast@gmail.com. You can also enter the raffle by writing a show review on your favorite podcast listening platform. So if you do that, take the screenshot, send it to hpopodcast@gmail.com, and I will enter you in that monthly raffle. Also, I'm excited to announce that I launched a new group coaching option. So to go along with my personalized one-on-one coaching options and my pre-made plans that I have on my website at zachbitter.com, this year I'm starting a group of online endurance runners who want to work with me in a slightly different model. So this model is set up so that whether you're a beginner or advanced, you can join. Whether you're training for something like a 5K or something as far as a 200 plus miler, you are welcome, and this setup will help you reach your goals. The way I have it set up is, if you subscribe, you will have access to my full catalog of training plans, which range from beginner 5K all the way up to advanced 200 plus miles. Along with that plan that you're going to use, you will have access to a weekly group meeting where you can ask questions about training. You can ask about adjustments to the plan to make it more personalized to you. You can engage with the other group members if you want. We'll get you all set up and ready to really personalize that plan to make sure that you're heading in the right direction for your event. Also, you will have access to office hours, where if you have something you want to ask and you want to just hop in and ask a question, you'll be given access to that as well. I will be bringing in guest speakers who have a deep understanding of specific topics and things that we'll use to better your training and recovery process throughout the course of the year, as well as a private forum for all the members to engage with one another, share stories, share training tips, and just house a lot of the information that we'll go over on the daily and weekly basis as you're pursuing your race goals. So if you're interested in checking that out, just head to my website at zachbitter.com, go to the coaching tab. From there, you'll be directed to the team coaching option, and you can sign up for that and get onboarded to join the group. If you're interested in keeping up with what I'm up to, please give me a follow on some of my socials. Follow me on Instagram at ZachBitter, on X, Twitter at ZBitter, and check out the brand new HPO podcast handles, which are just at HPO Podcast on Instagram and X/Twitter. Of course, all this stuff can be found quite easily on my website, which is the main landing page for everything I do at zachbitter.com. Here are some discounts and promos for HPO sponsors. Just a reminder, I have a full breakdown of how I use these products at the end of the episode. So if you're interested in more details, you can check out the end of the episode details, as well as heading over to the websites. S-Fuels, if you're interested in a right fuel at right time approach, check out their second generation products that just launched. You can get 15% discount by heading to their site. Also, if you want to try a free sample pack for the cost of shipping, there is a link in the show notes and the episode landing page for that. Otherwise, head over to sfuelsgolonger.com. John G Apparel has 10% off with promo code BITTER10. They make some awesome training apparel. And also, don't forget to check out their new multi-pass mini and sling bags. They are great. I use them both. Element Electrolytes has a free sample pack and satisfactory guarantee. If you don't like it, you can get your money back, no questions asked. Don't have to return the product. And that free sample pack you get with a purchase of some of their core lineup. Also, they have a new product, which is called Element Sparkle. It is a 16-ounce carbonated can with the Element electrolytes mixed in. This one is great. I would definitely suggest checking it out. I've been using it these last few long runs. Delta G Ketones has 20% off with code BITTER20 and also offer free consultations to help you assess how their products might work well in your lifestyle. You can head over to deltagketones.com to access both of those. Here are some discounts and promos for the HPO sponsors. I also have a full breakdown of how I use these products at the end of the episode. So if you want to check that out, head to the end of the podcast episode or wait until the end. Here are some discounts and promos for HPO sponsors. Also, just a reminder, I have a full breakdown of how I use each of these products at the end of the episode. So stick around to hear that if interested. Otherwise, head over to the websites. S-Fuels, if you're interested in right fuel at right time approach, check out their second generation products that just launched. You can get a 15% discount by heading to their site. Also, if you want to try a free sample pack for the cost of shipping, there is a link in the show notes and on the episode landing page that will get you access to that. Otherwise, head over to sfuelsgolonger.com. Janji Apparel has 10% off with promo code BITTER10. Janji makes some great training apparel. I use it in the gym and on runs. You also have a really cool product I've been using a lot lately, which is their multi-pass mini and sling bag. I would definitely recommend checking those out. Element Electrolytes has a free sample pack with a purchase of their core product and a satisfaction guarantee, which just means if you don't like it, you get your money back, no questions asked. You don't even have to return the product. They also just launched a new product called Sparkle, which is a 16-ounce carbonated can with the element flavors in it. This one's great. I've been using it in my long runs recently. Delta G Ketones has 20% off with promo code BITTER20, and they also offer a free consultation to help you better understand how their product would maybe fit your lifestyle and figure out what protocol would be best with that. So head over to deltagketones.com to check out their products and access that discount.
So we were originally based in Sacramento, and that's how I ended up training with Mark Bell and them over at Super Training Gym. But we just now moved up into the Sierra Nevada mountains, so we're about hour, kind of think
Oh,
a
right on.
little bit below to Lake Tahoe.
Sweet. Yeah. How long were you in Sacramento for? Quite a while,
Pretty
or?
much always, yeah. So
Oh, man. So I figured out who you were way too late. I feel like this has happened to me a couple times. Like I knew who Mark was while I lived in Sacramento for like 3 years.
oh wow,
Um, and I kind of met Mark after I moved. So I was like, dang, I wish I was like the Super Train gym was like a few miles from where I lived. And
what
I
area were you
ended
living
up
in?
going back and going on the podcast. So I was in Davis
Oh
for a
yeah,
year.
okay.
And then I was down, where was that? That was I was kind of between Folsom and the edge of Sacramento on La Riviera
Oh
in
yeah,
that
by
area,
Sac
if
State,
you
yeah.
know where that is.
Oh yeah, I was over in
Yep.
Roseville,
Yeah.
so I'm not
Hmm.
not too far.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Perfect. Yeah. 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 There's some good running in that area for sure.
Oh
I
man,
enjoyed that time for
yeah, you know, the
sure.
American River, the Sacramento River, the Folsom Lake. I would do that Auburn to Sacramento route. Like you can go literally, you know, what is it? I think it comes out to like 37 miles or something like that without ever seeing an actual road, just all trails and rivers. So it's really nice.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. Awesome.
yeah, so I was
Cool,
actually,
man. Well,
I was just gonna say, yeah,
oh, go
I was
ahead.
originally from there, so pretty much always Sacramento. I was born in the Sutter Buttes, which is again about an hour outside Sacramento. It's, I believe, the smallest mountain range in the world by classification, and that was
Yeah.
kind of, you know, anyway, short jump.
Awesome. I was looking at some of the stuff I wanted to talk to you about today, and I realized, man, there's like so many different things that
Yeah.
that I at least want to touch on because I think, like, I'll give you some background. I did a few podcasts over the last year or so where I was kind of like focusing in on just like hybrid athletes and stuff like that, and really my point of reference kind of was with ultra running. I did my first ultra marathon in 2010, and that was kind of like right as the sport was starting to have like a little bit of a flux in terms of like notoriety and people getting interested in it. And like at that point though, it's still just kind of like this like general assumption, like, oh, these kind of these like extra weird runners that do this. And like since then, that sort of evolved into like, okay, we actually have some high caliber, like in some cases, former professional, like track and field, road, Olympic caliber type athletes coming into the sport. And to some degree, some of those folks were there too prior. It just was events that didn't tend to get a lot of publicity here in the United States. But it's like since that growth spurt, there's been this whole another sport where or element to it where it just seems like everyone finds ultramarathon if they're interested in some sort of like huge physical like endeavor type thing. So like I see people coming in from the hunting community, people coming in from like the martial arts community, all over the place. Like I had a guy who was a former Division 1 offensive lineman reach out for coaching a while ago.
That's awesome.
It's just like, yeah. So it's just kind of been this like topic I've more or less been trying to like bring more guests on just to kind of get a bit of information as to kind of what drew them into ultra running, what they're using it for, and then ultimately just kind of share some stories about just like why that's fun, and also get into some of the other stuff you're interested in too, because I think there's definitely like some crossover stuff. I know you're really into kind of the history of just endurance and human powered endurance and things like that. You've got a background in all sorts of different stuff, so it's be fun to chat.
No, for sure. Yeah, I mean, I just as a brief overview, I kind of like pretty much all of those archetypes that you just listed. I fit into in one way or another. My to this day, I actually technically you would be the only person who's ever trained me in ultra running, and that's just the messages that I hit you up for advice here or there. So I'm no actual running experience or running background at all. My dad I come from a long line of Appalachian bear hunters, so houndsmen to be specific, blue tick hounds, plot hounds. So the way that houndsmen hunt is basically the bears, the pack of hounds chase a bear, and you got to try to keep up with the hounds best you can, and corral them and restrain them and whatnot. So I, from a very young age, was running around the mountains with my dad. It was like I think I was 7 or 8, kind of the first time I pushed my cardio so hard that I puked. It was like stuff that would most likely not be advisable these days, but it was just different time, different place. And so I became acquainted with that. I believe a lot of people call it like the pain cave, like very, very young. And I walked away from that knowing that it's all occurring in your head. It's not like you're going to go home, you're going to rest, you're going to eat, you're going to have anything bandaged up, and then you're going to be fine, before you know it. So I understood that at a pretty young age. From there, my life, I made, in my teenage years, I started getting into trouble, ended up being incarcerated a number of times, and ironically kind of found strength training behind bars. I'd always, like as a boy, been drawn to like the martial arts movies, like the monk on the mountaintop who's meditating and training in perfect, stillness and purity. And ironically, I met a few of the older guys behind bars that had kind of, they had come from legitimately bad backgrounds and done bad things, but after being in there for 10 or 20 years, had kind of found a state of Zen where they were in this, they would, ironically, they called it programming, just like we as athletes do. They called it like running your program. And it wasn't just your exercise. It's you wake up in your morning, your meditation, your prayer, your daily routine, how you comport yourself as an inmate, as a prisoner, your honor, all these things. It's just kind of like, your personality, your routines. And I became kind of drawn to that solitary mindset. So I ended up doing a lot of calisthenics in there, won a couple of the fittest inmate competitions, which were just basically, a group of guys, the guards get together and so you can do the many, many push-ups and dips and air squats and these, burpees in these certain amount of times. So it was fun. And it was also probably the first time that I kind of looked at, like, I drew a straight line between walking like a very disciplined path and experiencing like some form of freedom from it. Like, they say discipline equals freedom, the whole Jocko thing. That was kind of
Mm-hmm.
the first time I
Yeah.
understood the dichotomy of that. And it, eventually, so long story short, that was my, between being raised as the son of a bear hunter and then being an inmate, I had never really, I didn't have any, like, I was no professional athletic background, no training, never ran cross country. The one blip on the radar was that I was born, just came out of the womb as like a freaky, genetically fast sprinter. Um,
Mm-hmm.
when I was a preteen, I ran a laser timed 4.51 40-yard dash. I'd never had training, never done plyometrics like the other guys on the team, like none of that. It was just a weird thing. But the cost of that is that I had no endurance at all, like no endurance at all. Like very, very, very fast twitchy for, 4 or 5 good explosions and then just done after that. And so it made ultra running a run, any sort of long distance running relatively physiologically challenging in the early stages before I started to become what you would call maybe more of an adaptive athlete. Um, but I just loved it, man. The first thing I ever did was over COVID. I was up until COVID. I'd been doing and competing in jiu-jitsu a lot. I liked that. I enjoyed it a lot, but COVID shut down all the competitions at most of the schools, and I just happened to see online the David Goggins 4x48. I think at the time I kind of joked that it was like a training wheels ultra, but if I remember
Yeah,
right,
yeah,
it was cool. It was like if I remember right, you run 4 miles every 4 hours for 48 hours. And the first time I did it was very challenging. I had no training. I was just like a guy in a sweatpants with a pair of beat up old Nike sneakers. I didn't know anything about anything. And but I had a blast, man. I shuffled my way through the whole thing super slow. But I enjoy, I found a weird enjoyment from it. And so from there, I did one or two. Oh yeah, I did next one I did after that, I believe, was the Keep Hammering 125K. It was the digit like an online. It was still during COVID, so it was just like use tracking data and all that. And I just ran laps around my neighborhood, and same thing. Like took me forever, super slow times. I think it was like took me like more than 2 days to run 100 miles, or I remember the 76 miles rather, whatever the 125K is. I think it came out to like 70 something if I remember right. But I was just kind of stumbling my way through it. I had no idea what I was doing, and I still just loved it, man. And so from there, I started to kind of pay more attention to the actual running and started really just doing. I found I worked up to about one long run per week. It'd be about 30 miles, generally about 7.5 to 8 hour run, time with maybe a 30-minute lunch break in there. I wouldn't stop other than that. I just shuffle really slow, a lot of generally about 4.5 to 5 miles per hour. Just kind of in that. I remember at the time I had read something about persistence hunters, the Son Bushman, just kind of do like averaging 11 to 14 minute pace, and at the time that was like very fascinating to me. What they still are very fascinating to me. But I just kind of looked like, oh, okay, well, if they can do that indefinitely, then I can do that in small doses, probably without messing my body up or really not, being a super technical runner or knowing anything at all. And so I kind of fell into that, and I do a little bit of speed stuff now, mostly like our buddy Graham Tuttle. When I'm in Sacramento, I'll try to get together with him and do some very light
yeah,
sprinting. And actually, I found that really helped my lower legs and foot strength with the longer distance stuff. But for the most part, I'd like to shuffle long and through a wide variety of different places with varying degrees of support. And
yeah. No,
yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
go ahead. No, keep going. If you got more,
I was
keep
just gonna
going.
say I just got back from my last project I got back 2 weeks ago from the Sonora Desert, which was recently classified as the hottest desert on Earth with a satellite captured surface temperature of 177 degrees. That would be a surface temperature, not an air temperature, which is why I strategically went. I talked to like all the people who knew. I'm like, okay, so what is the time of year when I can go that the nights will be least freezing and the days will be least scorching? Like, where's the sweet spot? And they all said like kind of late April. And so I chose that. I chose the Anza Borrega portion, which is where the very the Pacific Crest Trail above the southern terminus happens to run right alongside this, which made logistics a lot more feasible because I had a support team and there was actually a whole film crew that followed me for this one. So this summer there will be a film coming out that kind of follows me through the whole thing, and that in and of itself was just a cool experience watching my team come together to support me with the film crew, with and sponsors, and it was a super like positive human experience. But the run itself was just amazing. 200 miles, 87 and a half hours. 30. My pack averaged between 28 and 32 pounds. It would have been semi-supported. So I carried like an ultralight tent, ultralight sleep kit, stove, kind of like a fast packing or through hiking setup, but very, very light, very minimal. And then basically the camps were set up about 45 miles apart, trail miles apart. And I would run about 50 miles a day. So it would be about that 45 miles. And then we left 5 miles in because I would have to divert off trail for water, and then also like there were a couple landmarks that I wanted, Eagle Rock and some other stuff that I wanted to go range off trail and see, and those areas. And so came in, yeah, it was about three and a half, whatever 87 and a half hours is, less than 4 days. And just man, just had a great time. Had it was really challenging just with the ground was very hard, and so the feet were the main thing. Like my back, my legs always felt great even with the incline. The nutrition felt like everything felt really good. Had a little bit of issues just with the feet, not even blistering. I had toe socks and outer socks over that, taped over my hot spots, and really didn't have too much issue. But the impacts, just it was just completely hard rock almost the entire time. A lot of parts, it was like the granite was very, broken and shifty. You couldn't really trust your steps. A lot of the Pacific Crest trails like that. And but by far the biggest obstacle was the weather, not the heat, ironically, but we got hit with a windstorm right when I was crossing like some very, very high
Mm.
cliffs, and that was the only time I can say in like all of my running or even my hunting, that I've been like, okay, that was probably too close for comfort because the wind just kept catching my pack, and a couple times I just have to like cling to the side of a rock face on a narrow path, nothing to hold on to, and just kind of like just close your eyes and just wait and hope. Um, but other than that, I like it. It was probably the most powerful, like positive experience I've ever had in my life, and so I was just, man, it's like that is exactly what draws me to the sport of ultra running, doing the self-supported wilderness stuff or the semi-supported. Um, and so I just, I can't get enough of it. I'm already eyeing up. I got Copper Canyon coming up here. Actually, there's a 100-mile backyard ultra outside Sacramento. I'll be doing in September, and then they got the Copper Canyon 50K down in Mexico in October, and then we're going to be doing me and I'm actually going to be leading the wild hunt team down to do the Ultra Caballo Blanco in March down there too.
Awesome. Yeah. So it sounds like with like the longer stuff, you tend to try to build like your own project. Have you done any of the like 200 milers?
All right, and so the longest thing I'd done prior to this was I ran the Oregon section of the Pacific Crest Trail in about 9.5 days. So that was about 500 miles. But again, you're still it's that's a long thing. You're trying to stop and sleep every night. So I was moving mileage wise, like pace wise, a little slower. Um, but this
Hmm.
200 miler it was challenging in its own ways because Oregon was very like it was extremely difficult, and I was definitely less prepared than I would have liked to be. But Oregon's some pretty tame miles in terms of like you see some pretty heavy incline like coming out of like Southern Oregon, but it really
Hmm.
like it's some pretty nice miles to run. A lot of it, even like a lot of the valleys and stuff are very soft packed dirt. It's very very pleasant. Whereas the desert was a little bit more hostile.
Yeah. Yeah. The desert's different. I lived in Phoenix for 4 years and I'm just a fan of the Aravaipa races. So I try to get over there every once in a while and do them. And it's just one of those things where like, yeah, everything's harsh. Everything kind of stings or bites. And if you get yourself backed into a corner, it can get brutal pretty quick. I was actually just out at the Cocodona 250, not as a runner, but I had 6 coaching clients that were doing one of the 3 different events they have there, and it was just kind of a bit of an eye-opening experience just to kind of like spectate it and watch and just see kind of what the differences are in terms of like just simple things like how do you take care of yourself in an aid station for a race that long versus like your more traditional 100 miler, or you have like this like very different kind of structure where you might, this is probably the case for some shorter ultras as well, but a lot of the shorter ultras I noticed in the United States, there's pretty frequent aid station support. So like, yeah, you don't want to make mistakes, but if you do make a mistake, you're not that far away from being able to remedy it. But I mean, some of the stretches here at Cocodona is like, oh, if you make a mistake, you might be waiting hours and hours before you get to a spot where you can actually even like begin to kind of address that situation. So that, and then you get kind of like the heat starting down kind of near Phoenix, and stretches of terrain where you can't really get an aid station, so there's like maybe a water pit and stuff, like, or not pit but a water stop. Yeah, like logistically, like I had some clients that were doing the 250, they started out with 6 liters of water for the first stretch. It's just like, just thinking of the weight, the extra
So
weight
heavy,
of just water you're carrying.
so heavy.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the
So,
it's the same on the trail. Like on with the Sonora run I did, I would see my crew for a health check and water resupply once at around lunchtime, and then at the end of the night when I made camp, like late at night, I would see them again, and that was also so the film crew could be there and be, access different stuff. And they had drones and whatnot, but that was the
mhm.
thing too, is like a couple times. So actually, I started off on day one. I came out of the gates and I made an elementary mistake that I knew better, but I did it anyway. I made a very small adjustment to my nutrition at the last minute, and I paid for it. And all I did is so I'm a religious user of a product called Scratch, particularly Scratch Recovery. I actually went out recently to their lab and had an electrolyte profile done. And so I had everything very
Mhm.
dialed in, but I was going basically instead of putting 10 scoops in my bladder, I decided to put 12. I'm like, oh no, we're opening up with some pretty heavy hills. Like I could use a little bit of the extra pop, from the carbs and a little extra salt. And thing was, by over mixing it, I was halfway through the 3 liter bladder and it was already sickly sweet to drink. Like it significantly altered the flavor profile with my favorite flavor is horchata, and that was the one I was using it still. So I wasn't able to keep up with my nutrition from hour 6 to hour 12 or so. And that, as you know, put me in a pretty big hole for the next 24 hours or so after that, just playing catch up. I was able to switch flavors, dial down the solution, and just keep kind of increase the volume of the liquid calories coming in on top of my other, all the other calories. And I was able to eventually dig myself out of that hole. But that was first of all a silly thing to do. But from there on, everything was great with the nutrition, and that by far has been the thing that's made the biggest difference in my training overall. But by paying extra attention to it when I'm like on the trail, and it's like maybe every 6, 8, or 24 hours that I get a chance to remedy something like that, like making that mistake and not having to write it out for the next 8 hours. So definitely a factor
Mhm.
that plays into it. But the yeah, Cocodona looks fun. They look fun for sure. Or that looks fun. I had a buddy that went down and did it this year. He sprained his ankle pretty early on too, and still managed to finish. So I was very impressive.
Yeah. Yeah, if your feet or ankles get hurt or beat up early on that course, you pay for it for sure. It's just kind of harsh terrain, especially in the early miles for there. But yeah, I mean, I'm curious with like some of these solo longer projects that you do. Um, how are you kind of breaking that up mentally when you have like such big blocks of time before there's like this logical stopping point? Because I know like with trail races and ultra marathons, there's usually kind of built-in scaffolding, I like to call it, in terms of like what are like here's some starting points of like let's take this chunk first, that chunk next. But when you start getting into like, oh, I'll see you at dinner time the next day, it's you must have some like premeditated like benchmarks you're trying to get to from a psychological standpoint, or are you more intuitive with that and you're just assuming those are going to present themselves?
So that's a really good question. But for starters, just for context, I should say that is my baseline. I'm only the last year or so that I've started doing more organized stuff more often than I'm like, oh man, this is awesome to have like help and to have access to this stuff. So I was, negligent, we'll say, more than anything. But
Mm-hmm.
even now, with it's organized, like you said, it might be, I'm averaging 8 to 24 hours between, check in, resupply stuff, other than some drop boxes here or there, maybe. But mentally, it there's a weird dichotomy here. So it's like as you know, when you're in the heat of an ultra, you're almost just running checkpoint to checkpoint. You're not running 100 miles. You're just running 3, 5, 8 miles, whatever it is to the next. Like in your mind, it's like, oh, okay, I get there, and then you're doing your checklist over those miles, what you need to check in, what you need to, address, what needs to happen once you do get to that checkpoint. So when you take all of that away, you kind of are left. You come to realize like at the opposite end of the spectrum, there's also comfort. Specifically, that like if you find yourself in a bad place mentally, or even with your nutrition or something that's a little off, you know that it sucks and it's taking your performance is currently taking a hit. But if you keep going long enough, things are going to come full circle and you're going to come back to it, at least mentally. And even with nutrition, you're going to get to a
Mm-hmm.
point where ideally you can remedy it, or you're not, in which case none of this is relevant, so it's not really worth considering. But you'll get to the next checkpoint, and like I did in this, and you'll play catch up over the next. You'll do your best, and then you'll continue on from there. But it's like what was one thing I noticed when I started running with some of my buddies. I met a couple guys in jiu-jitsu, one of whom was like a pretty serious 100-mile runner, did some stuff with Gordon Ainsley, and one time we were doing a training run. It was actually the training run for the Sonora camp. I did a My longest training run was I did a just kind of like to test the wheels and test my gear. I did a 100-mile training run, very low pace, was kind of aiming like a 28-hour mark. And a buddy of mine paced me for the first 26 or 28 miles, and he was telling me like we were kind of comparing strategies for these things. And one thing that we noticed is he was surprised when I was kind of telling him initially it came up when we are talking about like getting your gut waterlogged, and he's like, oh, after that, it's kind of like, it's really hard to recover from that. And I was like, oh, it's strange. Like, it happens to me, but I noticed if I just slow my pace a little bit and just keep going, like, some hours later, it goes like everything, if you go long enough, eventually comes full circle. And bringing that back to the mental stuff, nothing is more true than with the mindset, because in ultra running, you get the swings, the low lows, the high highs, and objectively, not much has changed from the 2 miles before when you were feeling terrible to the 2 miles forward and where you are now and you're feeling amazing. Like nothing has changed since then, not really. And so I just resigned myself to understand that the waves are going to come and they're going to go. I'm going to rise, I'm going to fall, and I'm just going to be doing my best to play a game of triage in terms of strategy throughout all that. But mentally, you just accept it because it's going to be okay. You're going to come full circle. And if you're talking multiple days, my God, like my first day on the trail in like a 3 or 4 day ultra is always my hardest day. Like I haven't found my stride yet. I haven't found my rhythm. My mind isn't quite fully present. I'm still thinking about that thing from work that bothered me, or whatever it is. So for me, it's like the deeper I get in, like yes, I'm watching my body degrade. I'm performing. My miles are getting slower and slower each day, but that's okay because my mind is becoming more present, more dialed, and I'm feeling more like me, the person, like the best version of myself. And then of course I always surge at the end for whatever, you go like the hounds that catch the scent, and they know it's fresh. You're like, oh, okay,
Yeah.
I'm 92 miles. Like, all right, I'm going to set a PR in these last 8 miles if I can. Best, you know what I mean? So, but other than that, yeah. And so it's, everything comes full circle though. And I know it's different if you're like, hey, I'm going to go hit this 100 miles and I'm going to, I'm going to set some crazy course record. I'm going to run 6.5 minute mile as an average pace, or like, yeah, there's less margin for error. But I guess that's one of the perks of me not particularly being a speed runner, and it's just I just kind of follow that wave and let it rise and fall as it will.
Hmm. Yeah, you almost get comfortable kind of knowing just from experience after a while that like a low doesn't necessarily mean this is my reality going forward, or it can only get worse and it's already feeling like rock bottom. There's this kind of like assumption, like if I just like kind of bear down and deal with it for a while, it'll kind of come back out the other end and then maybe feel better than I have the whole time at a certain point. And I always wonder where people are maybe getting that sort of like assumption from outside of maybe the races themselves. And for you, it seems like there's probably some background there with just hunting and then your time in prison where you have to like basically accept that patience is something you need to just like really, really be mindful of. And then like be ready when something does occur that is more stimulating than just kind of the back and forth that you're doing on a typical like hunt before you come across something, or before you get to a point in a day where you're actually going to do something other than kind of sit around and do very little. Yeah, I'd be curious if you feel like there's anything from those experiences that have fed into kind of the mindset for ultra marathon.
There is, and so like my criminal stuff started with drugs. I was a heroin addict, and that was kind of those two went hand in hand. I bring that up because I've been through heroin withdrawals many times, many times before I finally stuck. And that more than anything will illustrate like, oh my God, I don't. There's no way I could feel worse than I feel right now. And then tomorrow I wake up and I feel worse, and the day after that I feel worse, but the day after that I feel better, and then better and better and better. And so it's like these things, it's there's old like I can't remember it word verbatim, but there's an old Hindu proverb that it's like every time someone you love dies, you still laugh again, or it was like something to that effect. And I always found that powerful because it's like the world doesn't stop turning, and you turn with it whether you want to or not. So kind of getting in your head and overthinking things is probably the thing you shouldn't be doing when you're not in a place to be thinking rationally and clearly and directly about those things. So like I said, I tend to sit back, I do my best to relax and go with the flow. And I know like people have different tools for these things. Like like David Goggins, or at least that archetype of like intensity and like maybe there's hilarious stories. Cam Hanes talks about like him running with David and like catching up, and David just like yelling to himself, like So like everyone has their different tools. But for me, I find my
Yeah.
my peace in the exact opposite direction. Like, you ever heard of the marathon monks? Oh, you were just in Japan. The marathon
Yeah.
monks. Okay,
Yeah. Yeah.
so like their whole thing is like running is a form of meditation. Like it's a form of stillness and presence. And for them, I guess they're mostly shuffling, hiking, walking, but they're covering the miles. And so it's I really looked a lot originally when I first heard about them. I thought it was fascinating, and I did. I consumed every bit of information I could find, watch, read, in anywhere about them, and it really is for them. Like I think we, as I think it's, I mean, it carries to all aspects of life, but generally, if you can just get out of your own way, you can go a lot further. And
Hmm. Yeah.
so, yeah.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. Yeah, it's interesting too when you bring up like the drug pass and stuff. I help host a group run in Austin here, and it's a community run, but we've sort of based it off of like making it sort of a welcome spot for there's a group in town here, Alpha 180, who they help rehabilitate young men who've gotten like way behind on that sort of stuff, and then most of the guys who are coming to the group run are typically like they've sort of gone through that part of the journey, and obviously they're still like very much aware and needing to stay on top of kind of staying on the straight and narrow, so to speak. But it's so interesting talking to those guys because it's like they'll finish a run, and some of them it's like a few times like early on in the group there'd be guys who had run for like the first time in a while, and it was like almost this like kind of like light bulb moment for them where they're just like, oh, this is kind of like I get this like experience that feels like the good part of what I was chasing after when I was addicted or with addiction, but it doesn't have this like catastrophic impact on the things around me or the next day for me where it's like you're going to come down from that high. It's kind of like you do the work ahead of time and then you get the euphoria or the payoff at the end of the run, and it's just sort of it's sort of like an interesting perspective for them, I think, versus like maybe someone like myself who hadn't had to deal with anything like that.
So what it is from my perspective is it's exactly that, but it's that you get that high. Addicts, we're used to paying to receiving a high and then paying a price for it. The social stigma, the medical
Mm-hmm.
stuff, the actual come down. So when we get to something and we get to experience a high, and it's a more pure form of high. I don't care what anyone says. Like it might not be as chemically overpowering, but it's more pure and emotionally powerful. But it's a similar type of high. The thing is, we don't have to pay a price for it. You get that high, and your heart feels more full after. Like And I approach running as like a mental and emotional thing too. Like I go into every single ultra I ever run with a secondary focus, like something that when my mind starts to wander, I'm gonna bring my focus back to this. So for this last one, it was just being present, having fun. For the one before that, it was feeling empathy for people that I don't naturally, want to feel empathy for. But it's like just a little subroutine that I have there, and it allows me to become a better person each time I run more than 30 miles, but it also gives me a tool in the tool chest because it's like, sometimes you don't want to be present or your mind starts to spiral and you just need something to come back to and something that's completely unrelated to what you're doing in that moment. And that's, I find that to be very useful. And I think if you approach it like this, running more than just replacing an addiction is highly transformative. I mean, physical training and whatever you're into, yoga, soccer, Bosu ball, powerlifting, whatever it is, I've found, I find different nuances of that flavor in everything I do, whether it's lifting weights or jujitsu, running, hiking, bow hunting, whatever it is. So, but there is definitely something there. And I very much subscribe to the Johan Hari kind of method of thinking that addicts aren't like broken people. They're not like chemically wrong. They're just trying to fill a piece inside them that, that needs to be filled. And like the whole Rat City experiment. Have you ever heard of this by any chance? They took
I don't think so.
Yeah, so basically they made a giant. The scientists basically built a giant city for rats, and they put nothing in it but the rats initially, and then they put water, two different water, like water jars, one with normal clean water and one with water laced with cocaine. And basically, they found that the rats immediately, like, oh no, I'm sorry, they were with each rat was individually isolated within the city. Excuse me, that's a key point. And they found that the rats immediately, in their loneliness, became addicted to the cocaine water. They would just go to it every time and drink the cocaine water. But then they took those same rats and they placed them in an open city where they could interact, freely move. They had all sorts of toys, like literally like workout equipment, rat wheels, obstacle courses, all this cool stuff. And they still left the cocaine water and the normal water in there. The rats immediately stopped drinking the cocaine water and went to the normal water and became completely well adjusted. The only time they would go to the cocaine laced water is when they had an actual injury or some sort of like medical intervention or required some, it's like insane. We're talking rodents intuitively doing this, but it shows like the power of, it's showing the emotional component and the social component to addiction as opposed to just like, oh, that person's a bad seed or, whatever it is. So I tend to subscribe to that
Yeah.
myself, and I think running's a big part of that.
Yeah, it seems like so much of it is just putting like these opportunities in front of people where it's like if someone has nothing to look forward to other than that next hit, yeah, they're going to go to that next hit because it's better than the alternative. But if you have like if that leads to having no access to other things that are available to you, like with the rats, then you start seeing people kind of gravitate towards that stuff. That's interesting.
Yeah. So I kind of, long story short, I think that there's definitely a connection with the addiction stuff for sure.
Hey folks, just a quick reminder that this podcast sponsors include S Fuels. They have a 15% offer for you. Element Electrolytes, they have a free sample pack offer for you. John G Apparel has 10% off, and Delta G Ketones has a 20% off and free consultation offer for you. Links and details can be found in the show notes and the episode landing page. You can also check out a full description of how I use all of these products in my own training and racing at the end of this podcast episode. Yeah, there is like a draw towards, I think, ultra marathon running or just even any sort of like physical pursuit when it comes to former drug addiction and things like that. It's like it's almost like there needs to be something that fills that gap, and then the idea there is it's something productive, and to the extent that ultra marathon running is productive, I suppose it's certainly more productive than the alternative.
It is. And like, like I like to joke when my wife, she's a therapist, and so every now and then she'll, someone asks like, oh, what does your husband do? And she's like, he mostly just like sits on the couch, and sometimes he's on his laptop, and then like a couple times a week he just goes into the woods and then comes back sweaty, and that's pretty much what he does for work. And I was like, that is dishearteningly accurate. Yeah, that's pretty much it.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I do want to get into some of the stuff that you actually do because I'm kind of curious as to how you actually do all of it. I mean, we've talked about your ultra running stuff, but yeah, you also do jujitsu. You're not just like doing strength work. Like you have some receipts that would suggest you're doing a fair bit of strength work, or at least a reasonable amount in terms of being able to move the weights that you're typically moving. What does that kind of look like is it something where you're focusing on all these things kind of simultaneously, or are you going in phases of like, okay, right now I'm kind of in an ultra marathon phase, I'm going to really focus on that, and then I'm going to get into jujitsu after for a period of time, and then strength work? Or how does that end up kind of playing out in your normal life?
So those two approaches, what we would call the block approach, which is kind of focusing on one thing and on to the next. And then the other would be like a holistic approach, which would be integrating all these different things. So I've done both over the years. Now, initially, I would do a lot more of the block training because you're building a base, you're getting kind of established, you're learning, you're learning the skills that will later take a lot less to simply maintain, you know.
Mm-hmm.
If you've never run before, then probably, focus on some running to learn how to run, learn the basics before you start trying to do running one day a week, jiu-jitsu another day a week, powerlifting another day a week, kettlebells, that sort of thing. Having said that, I've done a considerable amount of all these different things. So now my training tends to be more holistic in terms of I do a little bit every week. My running schedule right now is generally one run a week, my one long run. And then I like to microdose running just whenever I can with my schedule. Like I literally keep a pair of ultras by the door with, a tank top and a pair of, water bladder and a pair of shorts, so I can just grab them and go if I have like, oh hey, there's suddenly 90 minutes open up, let's just go. But for the most part, my
Hmm.
structured running is generally one long run a week. I also do one VO2 max training session a week, generally on some sort of bike or cycle, just to take some of the impact off and introduce some variety. And then I like to sprint once a week, either hill sprints or barefoot sprints. Again, just to kind of keep the explosivity. I like the way it feels, and I think it's good anaerobic threshold training, especially if you're doing like some longer hills and stuff. And then I lift 3 days a week. Right now, since we moved to the mountains, I haven't been powerlifting at all. Just kettlebells, calisthenics. We have some rocks and some lumber around here. I like to lift either for work or for fun. And that's kind of it right now. Last time I checked, I still deadlift about triple my body weight, so it doesn't seem like the strength itself is going, without me being in a gym doing conventional stuff all the time. But I still do every now and kind of want to go like miss being in super training with all those guys yelling and clapping chalk and pulling something heavy off the ground. But the we'll get back to it. But long story short, I think there's utility for both block training and holistic training, but right now I do more of the holistic stuff.
Hmm. I like that where you kind of lay the foundation for each of them, and then you rely on kind of that principle of minimal input is going to maintain if you're not trying to actually increase necessarily any of those. And you probably can lean into some from time to time if you have something like a bigger goal within one of those
Exactly.
on kind of closer in terms. But I really like that description too, because I have this conversation a lot of times with ultra runners or my coaching clients, and some of it's just like there's always this like underlying kind of fear, especially for new ultra runners, of like I'm not doing enough, right? I'm not doing enough of the running side of things. And I always try to kind of like deconstruct the race first, just kind of show them like why that fear is maybe a little bit embellished. And at first, it's like, let's just practically think about like what's your goal time and what kind of moving pace does that entail? And then from there, let's look at kind of what's your easiest runs pace. And oftentimes that's actually faster than their goal race pace. So then we start kind of unpacking how much hiking and walking do you suspect you're going to do and still hit your goal. And then they start kind of connecting the dots where like, this is more about just like kind of perseverance and being good at moving. And it doesn't necessarily have to be as exact as it is for like Olympic distance endurance, where like if you're training for a 5K, you kind of got to get around to doing some running eventually to max. And to some degree with ultra marathon too, there is a difference between like you peaking and reaching your absolute physiological limitations versus like like hitting a goal within the context of your life. But I think people oftentimes overestimate how much running you actually have to do to find yourself at a finish line of one of these ultra marathons, and sometimes even the longer ones. And you describing like one structured long run per week. And I know from listening to you on other podcasts, you've done 500-mile projects. It's like you can clearly get from A to B with a variety of inputs that are sometimes not nearly as specific as people probably think to running itself.
No, 100%. And when I first started running, I thought for sure I had to do 100 miles every week. Like I was like, when I was building up, and I was like, I have to build up. I have to get to the point where I can do 100 miles every week. This guy said this, or this guy does this, whatever it is. And and I'm not saying like, I was wrong, but I don't regret going through that because it also built some capacities and taught me some hard lessons that I was glad to learn early on. But no, I'm very fortunate. Like my nutritionist, some of my support staff are like high level, trainers in UFC or UFC or the NFL. So they're very much like they very much reined me in and been like, look, there's a proper dose to every poison. More is not always better. Also, you start doing more, you start emptying your physiological cup and taking from other areas too, And that doesn't even have to be training. That could be emotional stuff. It could be your marriage because you're so drained all the time that you're, in a bad mood with your wife. You don't have, the energy to, whatever, and or your boss at work, whatever you got going on. So I think it's important to find balance and be precise, and that's why it helps to have coaches like yourself or have professionals to help you dial this stuff in.
Hmm. Yeah, I would be interested in kind of your nutritional approach with a variety of stuff you're doing. I believe you may have just kind of referenced it here too. You work with one of the lead nutritionists for the UFC right now for your nutrition.
Yeah, Jordan Sullivan, his handle online is the Fight Dietitian. He's the nutritionist to Israel Adesanya, Leon Edwards, Alexander Volkanovski. a lot of the big guys, and he in addition to having actual run a few ultra marathons himself and had a decent amount of experience with endurance athletes, is one of the world experts in basically athletic performance while depleted, whether it's from dehydration or caloric deficits, because a lot of these UFC, almost all of these UFC fighters have to cut a significant amount of weight, which entails long caloric deficits and dehydration periods in the weeks and days leading up to weigh-ins, et cetera, et cetera. So he's really dived into that realm pretty deeply and helped me dial in and figure out a lot of stuff. But specifically, my nutritional approach would best be described as just paleo. I'm not like I'll do rice and potatoes and stuff. I'm not against that, but a lot of meat, game meat, beef, eggs, bone broth, a lot of fruit, decent amount of greens, a lot of vegetables, but I do almost no gluten at all. Just my mom's Japanese, and I think just from that side of the family, we just don't really break it down as well. So I get a lot of gut
Mm,
distress and swelling in my knuckles, and I really focus. The main thing I focus on when I'm running is my gut, just in general, just its ability to process, its ability to stay fueled and hydrated, and all these things. Because historically, that's been the biggest weak point for me. And I noticed that just avoiding gluten in events really helped, and then I extended that to just everyday stuff outside of events, and it way better for me. But so yeah, just very, I think there's that old cliche saying, like, if it wasn't around 20,000 years ago, you probably shouldn't be eating it today. I just kind of follow that. High protein, medium high fats, medium carbohydrates. I throw in more carbs if I have like a lot of hills in the section I'm going to be doing, or like on the PCT, it's all hills, so I think a lot of carbs there.
yeah.
But generally, I do like clean fats as a good energy source. MCT oil. I put I put olive oil in almost everything I eat on trail. I like MCT powder, MCT oil. What do we got? I got functional mushrooms over here. I got tallow. I got so a lot of that same stuff. Nuts and nut butters I like a lot. The Scratch Company, they make a bar, like a bar that's dried fruit, nuts, pistachios, and some stuff like that. And those are just when I'm on the trail and moving. That's mostly when I'm eating. I just kind of rotate the flavors, and then add in fats, and then the carbs. Generally in liquid form when I'm on the trail, just 'cause they're easier to get down and kind of easier to dose properly in response to the hills or the incline. For me, the hills are the main thing that really call for carbs. Since I'm not torching 6 minute miles, it's like you can shuffle at an 11 or 12 minute mile and be still pretty fat dominant if you train your body to be
Sure.
over flat ground at least.
Yeah, it's interesting. I had a guy on the podcast, and he was Akshay. I think it was at the beginning of the year, and he's prepping for a trip where he's going to he's going to be I guess if it all goes according to plan, he'll be the first person to actually cross Antarctica from the edge of the ice shelf all the way to the other side.
That's crazy,
And it's just insane. He's going to pull 2 sleds because it's self-supported. So
dude.
he's like, I mean, at that point, like, I think his sleds weigh a combination of around 400 pounds.
Yeah, they'd have to.
So, and they get lighter, thankfully, but as he consumes, but he's just talking about just kind of like the food prep with it, and like the level of like dehydration, and just like focusing on like fuel sources that are like as high calorie and as low weight as he can get,
Yeah.
just to kind of shave every little last bit off of that.
Yep.
It's just like, it just makes you wonder, like, how you even get yourself in a situation to want to attempt something like that. But
Dude, yeah, that I've never done anything. Like, the Antarctica. That's
there's always someone crazier.
Oh,
Yeah.
no, yeah. I'm very, yeah, no, I very much have no stake in being the craziest guy on the crazy train at all. So I totally
Yeah.
support him. But no, I would definitely like to do some snow ultras. But man, Antarctica seems like that's not just like going to Norway or something. That's a whole different thing. So that's
Yeah.
gonna be awesome. I'll watch whatever
Hmm.
he puts out on it for sure.
Yeah. He got into polar travel a while ago, and that became kind of like an interest of his. And then he just went down that rabbit hole, and I guess it led him to this effort. But yeah, I think he actually pivoted this and ended up going maybe to, I can't remember where he ended up going. He originally was going to go up to like northern Minnesota, kind of boundary waters, this last winter, and do some training sessions up there, because apparently, like, at the worst up there, it actually mimics pretty closely to what he'd end up seeing out in Antarctica, and it was yeah. But it's just even the training just seemed kind of mind numbing. Where it's like you're, I think his breakdown was like I wish I remembered exactly. It was somewhere around 12, 14 hours a day was what he was going to give himself from a moving time standpoint. And he's going to cover like 18 miles. It's like such
That's
slow moving
that's
stuff.
so
So just thinking
psychologically
like, just,
unrewarding too.
yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah. hmm And he said it was interesting too, because when you get out there, it's just like white nothingness. So it's almost like you're in kind of like a sensory deprivation, but like with white versus dark.
That'd be good.
And he actually did some like darkness retreats to kind of help prepare his mind for that like lack of a stimulus from that sort of thing. And yeah, it was just pretty wild to unpack everything he had done to just to kind of put himself in a position to even entertain being able to do it.
No, so I love stuff like that, man. That's awesome. I'd be very curious too to see what his breakdown was like in terms of like his actual training, VO2 max training, as opposed to like resistance training. Like, you know what I mean? So you're not just training to run, you're training to pull a sled. Like even running with a 30
Right.
pound pack like I do alters the way I train significantly. So you're talking about pulling a
Mhm.
400-pound sled. I'd be very curious to see how he does that.
Yeah, what he told me was like since like the impact it becomes like less of an issue, he was doing very little running. And it actually paired in well because he had to gain a ton of weight. He had to gain, I think it was like 50 pounds
Oh, yikes.
because
Yeah.
it was just going to be more efficient that way. So he had to be fit and fat at the same time, which is like kind of a funny story. But like, yeah, so he was what he would do then because he didn't want to like the running's also going to be a lot more challenging when you're 50 pounds overweight and more risky too from an impact related injury risk. But he would just pull a tire. Basically, he got
Okay.
this big tire that weighed roughly what his sled was going to do,
That'll do
and
it.
had like a body harness he could hatch to it, and yeah, just would drag that thing around in Phoenix on like this little like paved sidewalk.
That'll do it. Yeah, I gained 8 pounds of body fat
Yeah.
before this one. I think probably a little. I think six probably would have been a little bit better. But I mean, four
hmm
day, we were planning for, under 40, so it wasn't that much. But the main thing was I figured I'd lose a decent amount through training camp, and I did. So there was that. Um, but it's something interesting you definitely have to consider in the multi-day stuff that I never considered when I was just doing like 100 miles. You know what I mean? So, but again,
hmm
it slows you down quite a bit also.
Yeah. Yeah, no doubt. I did want to ask you about just because I know you've dove into a lot of this stuff with some of the like kind of hunter gatherer
Oh yeah.
tribes and just these groups of people who've essentially used human endurance as a means of their existence. Are there any that kind of stick out to you as like ones that you find the most interesting?
There actually are, and you don't hear about this particular group that much, but the basic everyday, basically, they were the postmen of the Native American world, just the everyday messenger runners. And it was like there weren't, there wasn't like, they never really got that a lot of hype, but a lot of these guys have like, and I say confirmed, not like word of mouth, but like, so when some of these guys would run up to 500 or 600 miles in a stretch, self-supported, and you hear that and you're
hmm
like, I open with all this stuff from a place of skepticalness. The problem is that you see like Spanish military records from like dispatches that they sent, including like the payment receipts from one base to another, and they're 453 miles apart, and they got there in 3 days or whatever. And you're like, oh my God, like that. It's the same runner by the same name. He signed the same receipt to get his pay. At like, you're like, this is the 1700s. Like that's insane. And then just stories of this over and over again. Even some like the Iroquois Confederation, like in the events surrounding the American Revolution, so they had run like the Iroquois Trail was like 400 and something miles, and runners regularly ran that, just carrying simple dispatches or words. And so I never understood why they didn't get there wasn't more hype behind that. But they also had some pretty cool nutritional practices. 'Cause that's the other thing you think, like, okay, without aid stations, without like the message has to get there as fast as possible. So you're not going to stop and hunt along the way, at least not more than like, convenient small game that's already in their path or something. And you see
hmm
some cool stuff like the fox runners, the runners of the fox tribe. They would go, each runner would run with like a hide waist pouch. And in that, he would carry a desiccated buffalo heart. And as he went, I'm sure he would eat other things too. But as he went, he would tear chunks of that heart off and just eat it for protein and presumably for protein and micronutrients along the way. But it was like something that they did consistently. Apache runners down, Arizona way, they would do mesquite cakes and sometimes they would do mesquite cakes, and there was something else they would make. Anyway, some like a bunch of things that you would never really consider to be viable foods, that are really nutritionally dense.
Hmm.
And the Comanche, although they were riding long distance as opposed to running, they would do pemmican, which was
Hmm.
basically dehydrated buff jerky that was mixed with bison fat and some form of berries, and then they were made into like a shelf stable would keep for about a year into this like perfect superfood that had fat, protein, and a small amount of carbohydrates. And Comanche had almost no carbohydrates in their diet. It actually drove certain aspects of their expansion because they were forced to deal with either the Spaniards or the Apache or different groups that grew corn because the Comanche had no carbohydrates available to them naturally. They were entirely bison hunters, would have been pure carnivore without that. So it actually dictated their policy in terms of trading and raiding and warfare. Like who, because they needed some small amount. It was never a major part of their diet, but they needed some small amount of carbohydrates, whether corn or later from flour from the Western settlers. So that's just a little interesting diversion there. But yeah, so essentially the Native American runners and specifically what they ate fascinated me because logistics. It's like how, you know.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. It makes you wonder about just efficiencies and like how much more efficient you can be with very little. Like, we have all the sports science and stuff where, I've had guests on now where they're like targeting 100 grams of carbohydrate per hour or above for races. And it's just like, they weren't getting that back then. That's for certain.
I actually I'm doing research right now. I'm doing just putting out like a very basic free, I put out a lot of free training programs. In fact, most of what I put out is free. And the one I'm doing now
Yeah.
is based off the San tribe. And this is an introductory program. So it's like 15, how to build to 15 miles in, 4 weeks or whatever. And it's not like overly structured on times or breakdowns or any of that, but it's just like a very loose introduction, almost hybridized mini ebook introduction to like the San easy runs. You probably heard this term, it's big in Africa, particularly in Kenya. Easy runs are just kind of going out
Hmm.
without expectation of pace or distance and just connecting with the love of running. And so this is, anyway, long story. I was doing research for this, and they were saying that from a scientific evolutionary standpoint, the biggest driver to the basically what determines the best runners among the San and what separates them from so many others, other than the fact that the average male San Bushman is 5'1" and about 101 pounds, I think is about where they average. So setting aside that, the defining factor is who requires the least amount of water. Basically,
Mm.
who can go the furthest on the least. And so it's not like, oh, hey, this guy's fastest, this guy runs the best splits, or this guy has the best stride, or whatever. It's the hydration thing. And I was like, that actually makes a startling amount of sense.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I was actually thinking about that at Cocodona because there was like a bunch of, I mean, as you can imagine, it's a 250-mile race through part of the desert. There's just all sorts of things that go wrong for people. And then there's people who seemingly are just more tolerant or can process more and things like that. And I always wonder about just as the sport continues to grow, if we'll start seeing kind of more of a competitive pressure towards people with characteristics like that, where it's like, oh, this person can go that same distance with a third of the fluid requirement as this other person. And you start stretching out the duration of the event long enough, all of a sudden that becomes very, very important, especially if you have like less resources available to you, or you start hitting these kind of physiological processing limits and things like that.
Yeah, so we will for sure see that. I watched, I kind of went through, I started doing jujitsu at a key, right at the point when it was going from like niche to mainstream. And so I watched like over a few
Mm-hmm.
years of this huge influx of like more specialized athletes come in and like the same exact thing. Apparently, my nutritionist tells me this is also a huge factor in MMA. So in MMA, if you were to like test all of the champions versus all of the other fighters, you would see that the champions were those who were most inefficient with fluids. Essentially, they were efficient at dehydrating and rehydrating, which meant that their weight cuts generally took less out of them than the average person. And I think we're definitely going to see that in become more specialized in running too, because it's something that I've talked about with my nutritionist, and he's like, look, there are physiological limits in place. Like if you need X amount of water, X amount of sodium for every hour, but your stomach can only process, X, like it's just do the numbers game. Like literally
Mm-hmm.
plot two lines and watch them separate. and it's just a matter
Yeah.
of,
Yeah.
it's a matter of who dies slowest at the end of the day. And I think that
Hmm.
apparently that is so I need more than twice the amount of salt compared to the average person. It's like I need 800, there was something like 880 nanograms or whatever. Anyway, point being, the average person's like 290 or requires 290. I need 880. And so but outside of
Hmm.
that, I'm pretty resilient with this stuff. And I was asking my nutrition guy, was like, why, what is it? Like, is it just like a genetic thing? He goes, like, yeah, it is. But I also think a lot of it is just that you were training like a dumbass for 3 years who was running mostly hungry and dehydrated constantly, and your body got used to it. I was like, well, there is that. But no, 100%, because, if you need, like, if you think about it, if your stomach can only absorb let's just say, make it clean, 1 liter of water per hour, but you shed 1.1
Hmm.
liters per water per hour, or of sweat per hour, like, it's just a matter of time, right?
It's just a good equation. Yeah. Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And then you're going to favor smaller people who maybe have a similar processing capacity, but they're dealing with a much smaller frame. Yeah. Yeah. They actually had a study, I think it was out of Western States 100, where they were actually looking at just like the feasibility of certain things. And the conclusion was that there's no way you're arriving at the finish line hydrated.
Yeah.
So you're going to take on some level of dehydration. I think it was still within the range of being above, like, say, 3%, which is where they'll typically start to see like performance
Yeah.
drops in the
Yeah,
lab.
that's what they said.
But it was like, you're not going, yeah. So you're kind of like, perfection's not even on the table. So, like, when I heard that, I was like, okay, well, if we're thinking about like fueling perfection is on the table. Like, if you figure out what your fat ox rates are at the intensity that you're going to race, and then you have that other side of the equation of carbohydrate needs, you can typically build up to being able to tolerate that,
Yeah.
and then potentially arrive at the finish line with pretty intact muscle and liver glycogen stores. So it's like, that's the area where you can potentially make a mistake and not have it negatively impact you. Whereas hydration, you probably need to be doing as good as possible, because good is the only potential outcome.
Yeah.
Best case scenario, perfection's off the table. And I found that really interesting, because it's like, we take it out of Western states and we start getting into these, like, longer races like Cocodona, or hotter races than Western even. And it's like, okay, yeah, now we're going to see a lot of selection pressure as to who's better at what, and who needs what, and what that leads to in terms of depletion.
Yeah, no, I think so too. And it also determines how often you have to stop. Like I said, I'm not a fast runner, but like
Hmm.
I still can break, I can still break 24 hours, 100 mile, and do all that stuff, but I just don't stop as much as other people either. And so
Hmm.
that,
Yeah.
that, I think that's part of it. But
Hmm.
yeah, well, that the other factor too is what, like, people are running ultras in crazier and crazier environments too. Like, so we talked about the internal side of it, like, now
Yeah.
just for the external side, it's like, whoa, where is this headed? Next we're gonna run. Are you and me gonna be the first
Hmm.
guys to run on Mars or what? You know?
Yeah. 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 I'd be curious about, I had Andy Glaze on, and he was an interesting one too, because I was asking him, because he just does so much running. I was curious about some of his protocols. And he said that he never takes in electrolytes during races, but he had also never gotten a sodium test done, or an electrolyte test done. But I bet if he did, like, he's got to be like one of those guys who's like 300 milligrams
Yeah,
per liter lost,
has to
versus,
be.
like, I also had Andy Blow on, who is an extreme loss. He's probably close to you. I think he was close to like almost 2 grams per liter. So
Oh wow.
he's like 6x the very low end of the spectrum. And when you just think about just like the requirements, if someone is 200 to 300 milligrams, they almost have to be careful what they're eating so they don't get too much of it in,
Mhm.
versus the person who's 2 grams. It's like, you probably can't possibly take in that much sodium over and over again, and tolerate it to the degree that you would want, in terms of staying on top of it all the time.
No, that's super impressive that he performs at that high level with that high of a demand. Because as I understand it, like, my levels, it's like I need more salt than the normal person, but it's not probably not going to interfere with my performance because salt's relatively easy to supplement. My buddy Ben
Mm-hmm.
Greenfield
Yeah.
he's triple. Well, he's even more salt than, or he's even saltier than I am, we'll say. And
Yeah.
he's done a good amount of endurance stuff. But I don't even think I've heard of levels at 6 times the maximum. So that's super impressive that he's such a high level runner too.
Yeah, or actually, so that would be Andy Blow would be 6 times the, like, the bottom of the spectrum. So if you look
Really?
at it, like, if you look at the ranges, it's like the very lowest I think are like 200 to 300 milligrams per liter, and the very highest are like just above 2 grams.
Right.
So like if you're on the low end, then you're like 6, 7 times lower than the high end.
Right.
So like most people I think are around 950 milligrams, which is kind of like just population level average. And if I remember right, I think that makes up about 60% of the people that are kind of in that like that kind of more bulky area in the middle of the bell curve.
Yeah.
And then like 20% are kind of on the 1500 milligram and higher. And then 20%, I believe, are just like around 600, 700 milligrams and lower. So my suspicion is Andy Glaze is, even though he hasn't been tested, is probably on the low end if he's not supplement. Because I think he would have just like almost just like trial and errored his way to taking in more electrolytes because he would just be performing better
Yeah.
if he needed them. But I suspect he doesn't.
Yeah.
Whereas Andy Blow, I probably confused you with
Oh yeah.
with two
Sorry.
names. Andy Blow, he's the guy who helped develop Precision Nutrition, and they do a lot of those sweat tests.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, the reason he got into that was because he was doing, I believe he was doing like Ironman triathlon, and he would just blow up at the end of these events, and he's like couldn't figure out what he was doing wrong, and then he figured out that he was just losing a tremendous amount of electrolytes compared to average. So he was just plugging and playing kind of the population level advice, but he's an extreme case. So once he was able to bump up his electrolyte intake to something, I think it was closer to 1500 milligrams per liter of fluid intake that he was doing, he started kind of having more success and feeling stronger at the end of races, essentially maintaining blood volume, I would imagine.
Yeah. I also noticed that I recover way quicker now that I got my salts nailed down. And then when I got the
Yeah.
carbs in the right place too,
Yeah.
it's like, man, I used to be pretty wrecked for a day or so after. Now, like the day after Sonora, it was like we met. So I'm buddies with Barbell Apparel, and they a guy named Chad Wright, used to be a Navy SEAL, and
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
so they did a film
Mm-hmm.
about him doing Cocodona some time ago, and that was their first film, and they just did their second one, which is going to be on me and the Sonora event. And so I went to breakfast with them like the next morning after, and they're like, "How are you still walking?" I was like, first of all, I feel way better now that I got my carbs, my salt, electrolytes and everything dialed in. But the other thing is like post race recovery. I think that's another area where a lot of people mess up. And for me personally, I just never really stopped moving. Like the next day, I get home,
Mm-hmm.
and like the next day, I'm not doing much, but it's little stuff. Like if I look up and I want something, I could ask my wife to go, grab it for me. I don't. I usually,
Yeah.
if I can help it, I get up and limp over and and then at some point I'll go for a little bit of walk during that day. And then the second day I'll do like some assisted air squats, like I'll hold on to like a door or a band and I'll do a couple, just small sets. And like I never give the DOMs a chance to take over. And then extra
Mm-hmm.
sleep, extra nutrition, extra micronutrients and food. And the nervous system comes back a little bit after that. But it's like I see a lot of people that just kind of go full couch potato and just like bathe in lactic acid, just everything just locks up. And
Yeah. Yeah.
like, man, it also makes it harder to get back to training. I try to get back to training, within,
Mm-hmm.
a long run 2 or 3 weeks later, but just at a real light pace or even a hike.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, there's a nice spot somewhere above complete sedentariness, but off of your normal training routine that I think actually amplifies the recovery process. There's that movement component. I think it's a lot of it's just, in my opinion, with ultra running, it's like removing the impact so that the trauma from that can kind of heal. And then, like you said, catching up on hydration, fueling, sleep, those you can't surpass those as like the bigger levers to pull in order to get yourself back up and running is sleep, hydration, and nutrition, and then some light movement. Mix all those together, and everything else is probably just marginal compared.
It is. And again, I don't do performance enhancing drugs. I don't think that there's I don't subscribe to any of the crazy like taboos or stereotypes. I think everyone should do what makes sense for them. And whenever my testosterone levels are low enough to justify it, I imagine I'll be on TRT too. But having said that, I kind of take that as a challenge to see like, all right, how fast can I recover? Like, can I get like, like quasi
Yeah,
steroid level recovery if I just do everything perfectly? Because I do sauna, I do like a lot of that stuff
right.
too. Not big on ice. I mean, in terms of like, obviously, it blunts the adaptation process, which not so much of
Mm-hmm.
a priority after the event itself as opposed to the training leading up to it. But nonetheless, I tend to prefer heat and movement. And like you said, just like the basic things that assist those natural processes your body's already trying to go through. I think that's pretty priceless. But I put a lot of emphasis on recovery. Also, I train my body in multiple directions, so I think it kind of helps you switch gears. You know.
Yeah. Yeah, and I would imagine just generally speaking, a little more of a well-rounded approach too. You probably just have like stronger supports. So
There's
like,
that. Yeah.
if you go and do an ultra marathon and your quads are just destroyed, it's like your body's creative enough to avoid that muscle and use a different one when you're trying to get from A to B
Yeah.
or from the couch to the fridge.
No, this
And
is
you
true.
probably have a little bit of an advantage there.
This is true. Yeah, and like the resistance training, like I think that every runner should do resistance training in some form, whether it's
Mhm.
calisthenics in the morning for just simple mobility and joint integrity, or heavy lifting, whatever you're into. But I've noticed it for sure in injury avoidance and recovery, and simply just like lower back pain, shoulder, all these little things, especially with running with 30 pounds on my back, like it makes a huge difference overall. And it's like whether you're an 82-year-old grandma
Mhm.
that does some light band stuff, or a 17-year-old football player who's deadlifted heavy after you run, like whatever you're into. But I think that taking care of your bodies, it's resistance training and mobility training are as essential as the actual running itself.
Yeah. Yeah, both of those became non-negotiables for me the last 2 years. I've always liked strength training and I've had it kind of in the rotation more or less over the majority of my running career. But like to the degree where now it's like it's on the schedule at a very specific time, a very specific day, and it doesn't get skipped just like a run would now. So, and I think that that's the way to go. And if I would go back and do it all over again, I'd probably do that sooner. So, I think that's great advice.
Yeah, and I mean, it doesn't take much. Like, it really doesn't take much. I'm a big fan. I do calisthenics every morning just to kind of get my brain flow. As part of calisthenics and 10 minutes of Wim Hof breathing every morning just to kind of reset things and center myself. And I think, if it came to it and I stopped doing all of the resistance training, I just kind of beefed up that 5 or 10 minutes in the morning a little bit, that would probably still be enough to keep me healthy as a
Hmm.
runner. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Hmm.
But
Yeah. No, right on. I'm excited to announce that I launched a new group coaching option. So, to go along with my personalized one on one coaching options and my pre made plans that I have on my website at zachbitter.com, this year I'm starting a group of online endurance runners who want to work with me in a slightly different model. So, if you're interested in checking that out, just head to my website at zachbitter.com. Go to the coaching tab. From there, you'll be directed to the team coaching option, and you can sign up for that and get onboarded to join the group. I did want to ask you before I let you go, too, just a little bit more about kind of the hunting stuff that you're up to these days. What type of hunting are you doing?
so bear hunting, particularly, it's the most futile of all types of hunts is hunting bear with a bow and no hounds, because you're looking at, like, if you're real good, you're probably getting like batting like maybe 100 or 200. You know what I mean? But
Yeah.
I've never minded hunting alone. A lot of people advise against it, and in most cases, I probably would too. But I'm accustomed to it, and also I take all the precautions for, like a lot of people are like, oh, you shouldn't be hunting bear, you shouldn't be doing it alone. This that's like you control the controllables, and then you do what you're gonna do anyway. And so
Hmm.
for me, primarily Oregon and Idaho. Oregon's harder because you can't bait there, like you can't leave like bait sites out to get fix on bears to track their movements or anything like that, or get them, draw them onto your trail cam so you can track them off of that. But generally, it is like I'll hunt deer. I don't really care for deer hunting as much, but I'll hunt elk and other stuff. But the bear hunting for me particularly is almost my vain attempt to kind of keep an old family tradition that is largely outdated intact. Can't run hounds on bear in
Hmm.
Idaho, you can, but most states, like, it's basically being a bear houndsman is a dying breed. There's, by the time that my kids are around and hunting, there's most likely not going to be anywhere you can hunt bear with hounds in the United States. And this is kind of, kind of just my way of clinging to that tiny piece of my heritage. Like I said, I come from a long line of Appalachian bear hunters on my dad's side. My mom's family is from Japan, from a very old family, And though it's a shameful family secret, there are I need some tribal blood from the northern islands of Japan in our family tree, and they were big bear hunters too. And so at an early
Hmm.
age, it was something I romanticized and was drawn to. But now, there's still some of that, but now it's more just kind of like this is that last little bit of me, of my childhood, of the things that made me what I am. And then my dad recently passed away too, so it's kind of it's kind of cemented that bond, that kind of desire to be connected to him in that way still. At least that would be the psychological answer. The bro answer would just be, I
Yeah.
just really like being in the woods alone with pointy things, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. So is bear hunting dwindling as a whole, or is it just the hound version
Just,
of it?
I would say on the whole, it might, no, I'd say black bear hunting might even be getting a little bit bigger because like Steve Ranella and like the whole Meat Eater crew, they're big on black bear hunting. And there's also, they're not in danger.
Yeah.
There's so many black bears.
Hmm.
But
Yeah.
yeah, like hound hunting for sure, for sure. Like there's very few teams of dogs around anymore. Um, and just that old mindset. I mean, and it was old and gritty, but it was also just a lot less rewarding than getting a rifle and a hunting tag from Walmart and going and shooting a deer. And you know what I mean? It's like you got
Yeah.
to spend
Yeah.
years. You breed these pups. You spend years training them. Your heart breaks every time one dies from natural causes or on a hunt. And then it's you got space for them. You got to take them out and run them regularly. It's like you can't. They're super athletes of dogs, so you can't leave them in a house or an apartment. Like they need weekly long runs, like like 30-40 mile runs, like we do. And they're the only breed of
Hmm.
dogs I've ever seen that can keep up with ultra runners. By the way, like you can go running at Folsom Lake or wherever, and it's like I'm not talking 10, like
Yeah.
I'm talking 30+ miles, and they're still with you, and just like, oh, what's next? What's next? You know what I mean? They're just built for it. You see,
No worse for the wear.
yeah, and I mean they're physiologically they shed heat really well. They're very hardy. They can eat almost anything. Like, but just but my point being that it's like it's very niche, and just in general, it's becoming less popular at the cultural level too, I imagine. And so it is a little bit of
Hmm.
a bummer. And I'm actually right now looking for a good bear hound from a breed called a plot hound, which are they're old, they're hard to find, mostly on the East Coast, but it's the state dog of North Carolina. But they're legendary old world bear hunting dogs, and so I'm considering building like a good pack to give it one run, particularly as I get older, assuming the laws don't beat me there.
Yeah. Is yeah, is it just like because I would imagine it's probably just like a PR thing for the most part, where they don't like the optics of the dogs being out there chasing the bears around,
It
or
is, and don't get me wrong, I'm a extremely I have a high standard for animal ethics in terms of everything from factory farming to hunting to like I think it's very important to be aware of these things, and a lot of the organizations, even the ones opposed to hunting bears with hounds, they're filling a role that needs to be filled. Having said that, none of these people have
Mhm.
actually hunted bear with hounds. It's not. I imagine they're envisioning some like cruel thing where the bear just tears the dogs up, or conversely where the dogs just maul the bear. It's not like that. They chase like the hounds.
Oh, okay, yeah,
The
yeah.
hounds find the scent. They never fight the bear at all. They find the scent. They chase the bear.
Hmm.
When the bear hears the hounds bang, like he hears them from a long way off, he starts running. Sometimes there's miles between them. He starts running as they get
Hmm.
closer, and he realizes he's not going to outrun them, which can take anywhere from a couple hours to. I've been on bear hunts that lasted a day and a half. That bear climbs a tree. Like he just doesn't want to be near it. It's much yeah, like the way I describe it is he's not afraid of he's not even really afraid of the humans. Not afraid of the dogs at all. It's much like he reacts much like you or I would if like we stepped on like accidentally stepped on like a wasp nest, and wasps just kind of like we'd be like, okay, well, like we're not in danger of death right here, but we're still going to go somewhere else and just try to be away from this, right?
Hmm.
So that's what they do. They eventually climb a tree, and then you shoot them out of the tree, which again, pretty ethical because they're stationary. It's a clean shot. It's not you're not shooting some running buck or something. You know what I mean? Something through the morning mist. The whole process overall tends to be very humane and very clean. Certainly, much more than that bear gets treated a lot better than the cow that we ate this morning from the grocery store did. And but
Hmm.
until you've been there and you've seen it, and you've kind of felt the emotion of it. It's really hard to understand that. And you probably just picture like a very stereotypical scene of carnage in one direction or the other, but it's not like that, and it's important to remember that stuff like this has been going on a lot longer than we've had the laws saying it's wrong or right, or, you know what I mean? And if there's not distinct suffering or brutality or wanton waste, and like, who are we to judge? If that animal is suffering less than any of the
Mm-hmm.
animals that we eat every day, whether they're pigs, cows, or chickens out of factories, there's not really a moral component to it. If that animal, as in this case the black bear, is overpopulated, there's not an environment. In fact, the humans are an environmental factor. They always have been. So removing hunting altogether, like you see, there's steep penalties for like killing mountain lions in California right now, or at least there have been in recent years, and now they're experiencing a lot of negative side effects. There's people in San Francisco whose dogs are getting eaten by mountain lions who come down from the hills at night.
Right.
You know
Yeah.
what I mean? And it's not the mountain lion's
Mm-hmm.
fault. It's just the fact that you removed one of the natural pressures on their population, and their population exploded, and now the deer and the pets and everything else is just getting torched. So there's a balance to be had. Like again,
Mm-hmm.
I don't believe in like some you know free for all hunt, animal harvesting policy or anything like that either. I think you have to find these balance, and like most lifelong sportsmen,
Yeah. Let the DNR do their thing.
yeah, but it's like most lifelong sportsmen. I think that there is a balance to be had, and that hunters should help an environment. They shouldn't hurt it. They should help keep an animal population healthy. If you get too many deer, you get plagues of wasting sickness and Lyme, all these things that spread out. Same thing with the mountain lions or the wolves, whatever it is. But at the same time, we don't want to see these animals wiped out. We don't want to see them marginalized or brutalized. Recently, there was some guy, Steve Rinella outed him, or like put a spotlight on him, but some guy had like hit a wolf with his truck or snowmobile or something up in like Minnesota, one of these northern states, and like
Yeah, I saw
he's
that.
like he did some gross, and it was like every hunter I knew was just like horrified and disgusted by that. Like that, like no one I know thinks that guy should even be able to call himself a hunter. And but
Right.
that's the certain vision we have now is not someone who, and in a lot of cases with justified reason, unfortunately, but a lot of what we have now is not a public perception of hunters as the guardians, what we would call the gatekeepers, gatekeepers to the wildlife. And but growing up, my dad and my grandpa, like the whole thing that was like, we want these animals to be there so your kids can hunt them, so your grandkids can hunt them. We don't want to see the land or the animals gone. But it is a complicated world we live in.
It is. Yeah. I came across like a group of vegans who are actually pro bear hunting because bears are obligate carnivores and therefore there are more rights violations for the bear being alive.
Oh my God! Like I'm growing up.
Which it's just I mean, it's just kind of like what you're saying, though. It's like there's not a clear like answer other than balance as far as the world exists today. So, like, yeah, to some degree, wild nature, in and of itself, is just like repetitive, death and to some degree murder and all that stuff. So it's like, where do we interject ourselves or remove ourselves from that? It's not a clear. There's not a clear like. Path forward, I think, in terms of like moral superiority with that with
No,
that situation.
no, it didn't. I think for me personally, it comes down to the environment and then the suffering. Like no, you don't even want you don't want any animal, not even like a rodent, an insect, whatever. No matter what the scale or a fish, whatever. Like suffering is never like unnecessary suffering is never a good thing. There's no context where that's a good thing. Like there's my
Mm-hmm.
philosophy is that life brings enough of that. You know what I mean? So maybe let's not add more to it. But in terms, like as it applies to hunting,
Minimize it.
yeah,
Yeah.
and so it's like I'm not judging, I'm not telling anyone how to live, but if you're gonna eat an animal that was raised in a warehouse and then lined up, in a mechanical slaughter line and then bolt gunned in the head and done all these, literally by kill
Yeah.
machines, maybe don't judge me for every year or two putting an arrow through a bear that feels no pain. That arrow goes through heart, lungs, and out the other side before he even knows I'm there. He takes
Yeah.
5, 10, maybe 100 steps, lays down, take a nap, and that's it. You know,
Right. Well, yeah. Nobody eating a factory farmed animal has any justification criticizing a hunter. In my opinion, that's just ridiculous.
yeah,
It's like, yeah, if you remove yourself from the factory farming piece to the puzzle, I guess maybe you have a seat at the table for criticism, maybe I could say it, but then even then, it kind of goes back to what we were saying before.
you
And
remember like
yeah, I mean, it's
I was gonna say, you remember a couple of years ago, Chris Pratt got like a bunch of people wanted to get him canceled because he released a video where he explained he raises his own goats and slaughters his own goats, like that he raises them, they live a healthy life, and then he processes them for meat for his
Yeah.
family, and like people like had an issue with that. And I
Hmm.
was like, how many of you ate at McDonald's this morning? You know?
They were going to McDonald's after the
Yeah,
Yeah.
no,
Well,
exactly.
let's rally against Chris Pratt and then go to McDonald's afterwards.
Yeah. Also, like, where's your energy? Where's your life energy going? Like, what, like, there's only so many hours in the day, so many like tasks that a human being can physically accomplish in a day. Like, where's the priorities here?
Hmm.
You ever heard of
Yeah.
speaking of, have you ever heard of the
Yeah.
Eisenhower matrix by any chance?
I don't think so.
So it is basically, it's actually used for workflow stuff, but I've been applying it to my training. And essentially, it divides, like, think of it as like a high-tech to-do list. So you would take every task
Hmm.
that you have in front of you and divide it into one of four categories: uh, urgent and important, urgent and unimportant, not important and urgent, and not important, not urgent, essentially. And you would allocate each to a little box. If it's important and urgent, do it now. If it's important but not urgent, delegate it or schedule it for a later time. And then if it's not important and not urgent, they say just ignore it entirely. It's like pretend like it doesn't exist. But essentially, it was what Dwight Eisenhower did to like make decisions under pressure when there was like you know a lot of stakes on the line, and it's been adopted as
Hmm.
like in the productivity sphere as a very good tool. So I've applied that to my training, but that just reminded me of the whole thing, attacking Chris Pratt or vegan bear hunters, whatever it is. Like
Yeah.
Eisenhower would not be happy with that allocation of your time, I don't think.
No, it'd be fun to see like a percentage distribution from one person to the next in terms of how much time they're spending in each of those quadrants.
No, seriously, actually, hey, I never thought of that. That's pretty good. A buddy of mine, he's highly, highly introverted, bordering antisocial, but he's like, I just use it for people. I'm just like, there's something mechanically efficient about that, but fair enough. Fair enough.
Yeah, just don't fall into the unimportant, unurgent category.
I have one question for you, actually.
All right.
Have you ever, like,
Yeah.
just out of curiosity, taken like a look to do like a forum breakdown of any like tribal runners? There's a decent amount of footage of the San and Tarahumara and other people. Have you ever or just out of curiosity, looked at like how are these guys running? Just like a lot of they're mostly running in minimal footwear too, and doing. So I'm curious
Hmm.
if you had any insights on that.
I mean, I haven't done anything that would be like a real deep dive to kind of like parcel out the variance from one to the next. I think there are some people who have though. I want to say, what's his name? Shoot, I'm blanking. There's a guy who really is into kind of natural running and stuff that he's actually like a research scientist. So he's gotten into like just the different mechanics and forms of different stuff. But I think it's a pretty, I think that the interesting thing to me is just like the practices that they do. So if you have which tribe is it that does the like the bouncing where they'll
Maasai,
just stand in
the
place and
Maasai
like just
tribe.
yeah.
Hmm.
Masai, yeah, yeah. Yeah, I think there's like stuff like that to just kind of keep that keeps them like kind of structurally sound, and they're going to keep their mechanics more sound as a result. And then like you said, like they're not running around in footwear that would change their gait. So it's just kind of is. I mean, they may be dealing with other issues where the body's just fascinating in how it will work around an issue. Less protection, I guess, could you get more acute type issues probably with those groups where you step on something and break a toe or something like that. Now all of a sudden your gait pattern is off for a while. But yeah, so I haven't done anything that would be like really conclusive though in terms of just like what tribes are kind of more biomechanically sound, or if there is a variation between one to the next.
Yeah, I mean, at some point I'd be curious. I'm not a biomechanics expert as it applies to running at all, but I have noticed that whether you're looking at South Africa, East Africa, Latin America, pretty much anywhere you go, there's a couple lines. There's a couple things that pretty invariably don't change. The first, they always have very upright posture, like very upright posture, but still
Mm-hmm.
very relaxed, like arms, shoulders, traps, everything's very relaxed, but still pretty perfectly upright. The other thing is they all
Mm-hmm.
do a pretty solid, mid-foot to forefoot strike. There's no heel striking, which I guess makes sense if you
Mm-hmm.
ever tried to run barefoot, you know. And then they all seem to have rather short, rapid strides. And I found
Mm-hmm.
that very interesting because those three, just looking at, you know, footage, those three lines, I literally see, you can trace them around the globe from pretty much any tribal running culture to another. Some of these groups run barefoot, some run in minimal footwear. I've never really had much interest in barefoot running, to be honest, other than, you know, sprinting on some grass every now and then to strengthen my feet and ankles. But it is curious just to watch the impact that footwear has. I think, you know, like just like you,
Mm-hmm.
Ultra supplies the footwear for my events and stuff, and they're just the best running shoe I've ever come across. But it's like really they strike that balance, you know, between like giving you a genuine piece of
Mm-hmm.
performance footwear and not feeling like you're running in clogs, you know.
Right. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I guess I see what you're saying there. I bet you the cross or the comparator would be. I bet if I guess the way I should say it, if we compared all these kind of hunter gatherer tribes that are using like subsistence hunting or just human powered locomotion, more or less, I bet we'd see like a slight forward lean. We'd see their arms would pop back and kind of fall forward versus swing forward. We would see their foot plant underneath bent knee versus whether it's in the midfoot or the forefoot.
Interesting.
It's going to come down underneath that kind of knee collapsing versus out in front of it.
Oh,
And then, like you said, we're going to see a higher cadence, probably like somewhere in like the 170 to 190 range or something like that, depending on how fast or slow they're going.
fascinating. Why? What makes you say that with the bent knee? I mean, you're right. I'm just curious what how you clock that without actually looking for it.
Yeah, so I would just imagine like if you're wearing or if you're running to a large capacity and staying injury free, you're probably absorbing the impact forces in the most optimal places so that you're not like asking a certain body part to take on a load over time that it's not meant to tolerate. And one of the more, I think, one of the more potential triggering things that you can do with a running mechanic that's going to lead to some sort of injury, whether it's upstream or downstream, is if that foot is bearing the weight of your loading outside of like their knee being able to collapse down into it. So you think of like your knee as just like collapsing down, like you want that to kind of like slowly decelerate to absorb that impact
Gotcha.
versus kind of have like an abrupt thing. So if someone's overstriding, then like they potentially are going to come down on like their heel or the back half of their foot, and that's going to raise their toes up and they're going to plant down there, and it's going to make like a straight, like their knee will be straight,
I can picture
their
that.
leg will be straight out at a slant. And if you just imagine like the impact forces that are going to be generated into the knees and hips in that scenario, even if it's really subtle at a slow pace, it's just like repetition of that over time is eventually going to deteriorate things or create overuse injuries and end up. The way I look at it is like there's no way around impact forces; they're going to go somewhere. So we want to send them to the areas that are intended to absorb them in the most biomechanically way possible. And I think that's always going to be under bent knee, whether it's forefoot or midfoot
That's amazing. Okay.
or even rear foot to some degree. If someone is like, you could get someone who maybe has just like an atypical biomechanic and they are managing to kind of, and it wouldn't probably be like a direct heel strike. It would probably be more kind of like near the back half of the foot, probably along the outside. I could see that scenario being something where someone could potentially be biomechanically sound and still be coming down under bent knee.
That's fascinating. I kind of wondered. So I run, you know, obviously slower, but also with the shuffle, I never fully overextended like that. Like I'm always under bent knee. And so
Mm-hmm.
I've observed that in other runners. Cliff Young, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, was another one that farmer who ran a 544 mile, won a 444-mile ultra in Australia in 1982. Then again, he was running in work
Yeah.
boots, so he might not have had much choice. But I've observed that, and I wondered, you telling me that that cuts down on the incidence of injuries and overall chronic wear and tear explains a lot because I've run with guys who run like that, and I mean most of them were way faster, but they had like way more injuries than me, and I just at the time assumed it's because they're running faster, but they're like triathletes, you know
Mm-hmm.
what I mean, that like to get that full extension and like kind of reach for steps, and so that makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah, I would say running faster as a practice is probably going to support that sort of a mechanic too, because like the faster you go, the more your body's kind of inclined to try to like find the position that's going to be most efficient. almost out of necessity. So then as kind of like a side effect of that is you're going to also strengthen those areas. And the stronger you make the areas that are going to be the main supporters of a proper gait pattern, the better you're probably going to maintain that. Because there's also kind of like there's sort of two things. There's like someone has a bad form in general, or do they have, are they just weak? Is their form weak in the sense that like they can tolerate good form for say 30 minutes, but if they go for a 45 or 60-minute run, it deteriorates to the degree in which now their form is different at the end of that run, and then they pick up all sorts of like injuries from that too. So yeah, I mean, I think a lot of that stuff tends to get fixed almost by default with a higher cadence.
Yeah.
Because if you speed up your cadence, it just becomes like very difficult to overstride. And a lot of these things are kind of born out of overstriding.
Right. Yeah, my wife has that. I mean, we've been adjusting it, but yeah, it's like that reaching. It's like that's what, or at least that's what it's called. It's the same thing that striding to full extension. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it's interesting. It's interesting. I really haven't delved too much into the like the individual biome. Like, actually, I probably should, honestly. But actually, I have one selfish question for you too. I'll be doing,
Yeah.
let's see, yeah, late September. I'll be doing my first backyard ultra. It's only 100 miles. I'm not like trying to push any crazy pace records or anything. But would you program for that any differently than Or let me rephrase that. How would you program for a backyard versus a? It's like just I think it's like 1 mile loops too, as opposed to just
Yeah.
some of the
Mm-hmm.
longer stuff that I'm more accustomed to in terms of breaks in between aid stations and whatnot.
Yeah. So the way I usually look at any event when it gets, because even ultra marathon has kind of got this characteristic in general where it's like, I'm training for an ultra marathon. How should I do it? It's like, well, are you doing a 50K? Are you doing a 250 miler? Are you doing a backyard? You're doing a timed event, trail, all this different characteristics. So usually I start with the event and start looking at what are the unique characteristics that will be optimal for reaching your goal there. So if it's like a backyard style event where I'm guessing it's like, if it's kind of traditional, it's like 4.2 miles and you have an hour to complete each loop and you just kind of rinse and repeat every hour. For that, I'm looking at a scenario of we want you to be completing that loop as close to that hour as possible, but still giving you enough time to prep for the next one.
Okay.
So from the people I've worked with, that's usually probably like 50 to 55 minutes is a pretty decent kind of like zone to give you. I think like 5 minutes should be plenty in most cases. You might have like an oddball loop where you're like, okay, I'm gonna try to finish a little quick because I'm gonna like try to get something done that's a little more needy than I typically would. But I think most aid states and transitions can be done pretty efficiently in 5 minutes.
Yeah.
So like trying to get closer to maybe 55 than 50 in most cases, because we're just trying to minimize the workload required for each one of those loops, because a loop is a loop, whether you do it in 40 minutes or 59 minutes. So a 40-minute loop is just going to take on a lot
Right.
or a bigger workload than a 59-minute loop. So I think like avoiding kind of increasing your workload as much as possible is going to be the move. So then it's just like, what makes up that? So if like getting to say, let's just say 55 minutes is our kind of standard target for per loop, what is it going to take from like a pacing standpoint? Or what combination of running and hiking is going to get you to 55 in a really efficient way? And once we can kind of determine that, then we start kind of programming in a way to work towards that. So with enough time, I would probably still start out with like a scenario of least to most specific in terms of what I would program. So I'd still have someone do like a speed work development phase early on in that, just to kind of get, for you, you might be unique with this because you're probably getting some of this stuff from cross training type activities. If I'm working with someone who's more or less like mostly wants to run and everything else is a little bit secondary, I'm going to have them do like short intervals and long intervals. And then once we're kind of through that phase, we'll start to kind of pull back on that intensity work and start working on the actual specifics that they'll use for that backyard loop. So let's just say, for example, we find out their pacing is going to entail a 50-50 split between like a real easy jog close to their real easy recovery run and like a purposeful walk or hike.
Okay.
I'm going to start building in kind of long runs that are kind of matching that sort of a 50-50 run walk strategy. If we can on a course that's kind of specific to the loop that they're going to be doing. and just kind of like working on kind of how everything goes within that. I guess with the backyard, I'd maybe even like entertain like a scenario where I'm having them do like a structure similar to that, where instead of just going out for like say a 4 hour long run or something like that, let's actually do like 4 or 5 yards in practice just to kind of get down the repetition and kind of stress test the 5 minutes in terms of what they maybe would need, and start to kind of figure out where some holes are in the approach and make sure that they have some like solutions to flex to if needed, if things don't go as expected.
So that actually is a perfect plug for some content I just saw you put up on training races. This would be a training race,
Yeah,
yes.
yeah, uh-huh.
um,
Yeah, training races are an interesting topic, I think. Find
yeah, I see. I mean, I can understand. What's the argument against, out of curiosity?
the argument against them is just the opportunity cost.
Okay.
So, like, if I go out, let's say, if I go out this weekend and hammer a 50K, I have to ask myself, what could I have done otherwise? And if the answer is I could have done 250Ks closer to goal race intensity, and I exchange that for a non-specific intensity and half the
Yeah.
duration, I'm probably not going to have as good of an opportunity to develop what I need to develop for the race itself. I think all of that stuff is more or less cured with a proper timeline, though. So, like, if I want to try to get the best of both worlds, I just build a timeline in which I can get the enough of the volume at goal race intensity in place, and also have enough room to slide in a training race and get the value of actually practicing race day type characteristics that are unique to that.
Gotcha.
So the way I tend to look at it is like, if we look at it like the mover is going to be volume spent at the goal intensity. So if the thing you're doing is removing some of that, you're likely to some degree like not maximizing that. But there's a margin of diminishing returns on everything. So it's like eventually you get to a point. I mean, people. I listen to the like extremists on either side, and I find it both kind of like entertaining because they both just kind of want to justify the approach as badly as they can. And it's like the argument for never doing training races or never doing like ultra style long runs in general is just you're going to get more quality work and higher amount of volume by reducing it. So they're looking at it from a margin of diminishing returns in the sense that, say, if I do a 30-mile long run instead of a 22-mile long run, then I'm going to get less overall volume over the course of, say, a year or something like that. I just think that's going to be an individual question more so than it is going to be like, this is the right way or this is the wrong way. Because like, if you can get enough quality and volume in relative to what you're able to recover from anyway, and you can also extend some runs and get some race specific like duration type stuff in the training, I think there's a value add there too. So yeah, it's an interesting topic though.
Yeah, it is. See, I mean, it seems like you could minimize the downside quite a bit by, I mean, integrating that actual training race into your original plan, and then obviously, like you said, selecting something,
Mm-hmm.
getting that specificity as close as you can. But that's interesting. I've never
Yeah,
really.
yeah, say for example, like,
Oh, God.
yeah, if you just said like, let's just say like 18 weeks, we know for a fact 18 weeks is what is going to be required to put in the work that's going to peak you for said race. Well, give yourself a 20-week timeline so you can include the training
Yeah,
race.
exactly.
That's kind of the simple way to look at
Yeah,
it. Yeah.
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 Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, then again, I've never had to really juggle tight time frames. Usually, it's like I'm like a two event a year type of guy. Like, one earlier on, one later on,
Hmm.
and but then again, that's there's like these Copper Canyon, the Ultra Caballo Blanco, these Tarahumara races in Mexico now have my attention. So that's kind of, I have like three, I think, in a 6 month period this fall. So that might have gone out the window.
Yeah. I, I would say probably one of the bigger problems people run into with training races or just doing too many events is they have a hard time kind of scaling back appropriately. So, they find that I'll ask my coaching clients this sometimes when we're talking about this topic, like, are you the type of person where if you're on a starting line and the gun goes off, it's 100%? Or are you the type of person who it's like, oh, coach said, let's keep this at 80% capacity and treat it more like a high quality long run, and you have no problem doing that? If they're the former versus the latter, I'm going to be a little more like, are you sure you want to do that?
No, I'm
Or we're going to structure their training in a way where they have more peak races and a timeline that supports them than the person who can kind of like scale it back.
Yeah, that makes sense. I'm pretty good. I'm a good soldier when it comes to coaching. Like if I, and I generally, I'm pretty disciplined with stuff like that. When I was younger, maybe not so much, but the,
Yeah.
yeah, it's something I'll probably pick your brain on that as it gets closer. Do you know anyone who's done that? Any of those Copper Canyon runs or any of those, the Tarahumara races?
Yeah, I do know a couple people who've done it. Are you looking to chat with someone who's been out there?
Yeah, basically just. I mean, I know that everyone talks about the incline, and I'll be as ready for the elevation as I can. But it's just if anything jumped, I was curious if anyone mentioned anything that jumped to you that you might thought I'd find useful.
Oh, yeah. I can't think of anything specific that would stand out that I can recall anyway, but I can ask some people too. I know a few that have gone out there a bunch of times actually, so
Yeah,
they'd have a pretty good idea of just what to
yeah,
expect.
that'd be awesome. I mean, again, it's not you know, it's I'm going. I'm really excited for the. It's the most excited I've been for something like this in a while. But just the cultural experience, the whole, just to be in
Yeah.
it. I like mountain running, so I'm not really worried about incline or elevation. I know that kind of turns off a lot of people to some of those races. But no, just and I read someone sent me like maybe it was just on the website, but I read like breakdown the different sections. It sounds awesome. But I mostly am thinking like
Yeah.
logistic stuff. Stay here, don't stay here. Do this, don't do this.
Oh,
But
gotcha.
hey, I'll take
Hmm.
I'll take all the advice in terms of actually running as possible too. But
Yeah. They did have an issue with that event a few years. This might have been before the pandemic, actually, even where like they had to cancel it because there was some. I think there were some drug cartels who kind of rolled through the area, and I think it got pretty bad for some of the locals.
yeah,
But they basically had to pull out, and there was a few people that kind of went and ran it unattached from an event, anyhow. But there's some risk entailed there, I know, but I'm not sure how much of a concern that is today versus when that happened.
yeah, I'll definitely keep an eye on that. I have a bodyguard actually who's a former intelligence agent, so I tend to just be like, hey, so do your
Run everything by him.
yeah, I'm
Yeah.
like, hey, any of your shadow sources, your Jack Ryan stuff, but he generally is. He's a close personal friend. He's pretty good at about keeping me out of making stupid decisions. So
Right on. Well, that's good.
yeah, he was actually the guy who oversaw my caches when I was in the desert. And he also, a man of many talents, is a gourmet chef. So one of the nights out there, he brought me a paper plate with sliced ribeye and asparagus and black
Really?
rice on it. Oh, yeah, I had real food in my tent, man. It'll be in the documentary. It'll be in the documentary. I'm just eating it with my hands, just during my
Yeah.
yeah, that was
That
fun
was
stuff.
best ribeye you ever ate,
Best
I
ribeye I ever ate,
bet.
no doubt. But
Awesome.
shit, yeah, man.
Well, James, I want to make sure that you can kind of plug what you're up to. I know you mentioned some of this stuff, but is there like I'm guessing there's a website that has like most of the stuff you've mentioned that people can find if they're looking for it.
Find anything I have at wildhuntconditioning.com. Functional training plans, hybrid training plans, some little tribal running stuff. No event specific or program specific stuff, but or distance specific stuff. Excuse me. But everything there, my goal is to create the largest free training library on earth. Um, Mostly because I have made every training mistake possible on my journey to be here, and spent a lot of time and energy and money building my system. So if I can help anyone else avoid any of those pitfalls, all the better. And that's pretty much it. Oh, and then the film about my Sonora run will be out this summer, July, I believe they're telling me. It will be called A Good Day to Die. And so if you're into ultra running or wilderness running, the outdoors in general, or the desert, you will definitely want to check that out. And I think that's it, pretty much. I know you and I have been going back online for a while, so I finally just wanted to get a chance to sit down and do a deeper dive on some of this stuff with you. So I'm glad we got to.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it was a blast. I'd love to have you back on down the road, and
Anytime.
if nothing else, maybe we could unpack some of the hunter gatherer tribes. I'll get caught up on any of the research of any of the popular ones you like, and we can do a deep dive into some of them.
Oh, dude, that would be literally that. I'll have that conversation with you anytime you want. But I'm in the middle of a
Right
big
on.
block on tribal running right now, so that'll in the future that'll make a we'll have plenty of material.
Awesome. Cool. Well, I'll shoot you a note and see where I should start, and then we can go from there.
Yeah. I'll message you my cell phone when we get off here, so you'll have that.
Right on. Perfect, James. Have a great rest of the day.
You too, man. Thanks, Zach.
Thanks for tuning into this episode of the Human Performance Outliers podcast with Zach Bitter. Hey everyone, thanks for sticking around to hear more about how I use the products that sponsor the Human Performance Outliers podcast. I have updated a few things, so if you follow closely, you may notice some new details here. I have taken a lot of time identifying these brands, and I'm incredibly grateful that they have provided a product that I use routinely and are also interested in supporting my work here at the Human Performance Outliers podcast. So here is how I use them. S-Fuels is a product that follows a principle of right fuel at the right time. For me, this means I can anchor my nutrition in a fat-dominant way, but not neglect the powerful application of carbohydrates when they are needed. Their product lineup maps the low-carbohydrate dietary protocol that I have used for endurance since 2011. Here's how I use some of their product lineup and some of their second-generation products that they've just recently brought to market. First is their Zone 4 and Zone 5 product. I use these for intra-workout and race carbohydrate targets. I will use the Zone 4 in less glycolytic settings that still benefit from some carbohydrate, and Zone 5 for workouts that I prefer, workouts and races where I want to maximize my carb to other fuel source exogenous inputs. In short, I prefer Zone 5 when my carb inputs are at their highest and I want to kind of go straight to that source. Zone 2 is a fat-based powder that uses C8 and C10 MCTs that are combined with L-glutamine. I use this for lower intensity workouts to help promote higher fat oxidation rates without neglecting energy deficits. So in short, if I'm doing something longer and I want to keep carbs out, but I don't want to have a huge calorie deficit, Zone 2 plays a great role there. Revival is a post-workout race protein powder that I can easily add to some yogurt or a low-carb smoothie to quickly jumpstart the recovery process. I will use a product like this most often when I'm completing training sessions and have a lower appetite or desire to eat solid foods right after, but want to get a jumpstart on replacing some of the stuff that I left out there. Primed is my go-to caffeine source for training and racing. It combines green tea extract, L-carnitine, taurine, and B vitamins, which all combine to help support energy production, fat metabolism, and reduce perceived effort. Life Bars are a product that have been one of my favorites on the S-Fuels lineup for some time now, and they are a great combo of healthy fats and protein that I can have prior to a big training session, race, or simply as a snack on heavier training days. Grain-free breakfast cereal is something that I can sub in for just about any time I would have put granola on something when I was a more moderate high-carb person. So this is a good substitute for that. Oftentimes I will put it on top of things like yogurt as a topper or something like that. If you're interested in more details about their product lineup, the science behind it, and everything else, head over to sfuelsgolonger.com for up to 15% off your next order. And stay tuned for some product giveaways and promos over the course of the year. I got introduced to Janji last year and have really enjoyed having some of their products in my running and gym rotation. Janji makes pants, shorts, outerwear, tops, and accessories. Janji apparel is made with durability in mind and is backed by a 5-year run everywhere guarantee. Each design is informed by a different part of the world through collaboration with local artists and in partnership with clean water nonprofits with whom they have contributed over $1 million donated to clean water solutions. Some key features that Janji really focuses on is lightweight, breathable, moisture wicking, odor resistant, thermal regulation, and a super soft and flexible material. Here are the products that I've been using a lot so far this summer. I'm still going with the AFO middle short for very light breathable training sessions where minimal pockets and extras are not desired. So think a very humid summer training run where I want as little on as I can get away with and feel like it's not getting bogged down with a bunch of sweat. The 5-inch multi-short. So I'll sub this one in for sessions where I do want a bit more storage capacity that is placed in the right areas or the right spots. So think things like where I put my phone, does it sit nicely? Or is there a spot to put my key where it's not flopping around or poking me in an awkward place or things like that. So I really like the 5-inch multi-short for that sort of a training session. A product I'm really excited about, which isn't necessarily a training gear per se, is the Multipass Mini and Sling bags. These are the newest items I have started using from Janji. The only question for me is how much stuff do I need, which will determine which one of these I will bring with me. The Multipass is a great for just stashing things like your keys, wallets, phones, headphones, or any item you want to have with you, all while keeping your pockets free from clutter. It's got a nice clippable strap that you can put around your waist or over your shoulder. I'll upgrade to the sling bag if I'm bringing a little more stuff and it's just not enough room inside that Multipass Mini. So think things like the size of a water bottle, or if I'm just going to be on a little longer session or heading to the airport or something like that, and I just need more storage, but with that same type of design with the waist and shoulder options and the clippable strap. So those are two of my new favorite options. Check those out. You can head to janji.com and get 10% off any of those items as well as anything else they have on there by using promo code BITTER10 for 10% off. They're also available at REI. I will give one quick plug, although it's not winter or cooler. A couple other items that I have in my rotation when it does get cooler is the Repeat Merino long sleeve, the Rover Merino hoodie, the Trail Tights, and the Atlas multi-pant. I've been using Element electrolytes for quite some time now. Actually, a while back, I had a sweat test and it suggested that I lose 614 milligrams of sodium per liter of fluid loss, meaning if I go out for a run and I sweat to the capacity where I lose a liter of fluid, I'm going to lose 614 milligrams of sodium along with that. So during these hot summer months, it's not uncommon that I will lose over a liter per hour when working out. So I favor adding some electrolytes to my workout fluids and pre-workout drinks in order to account for this. I also find it beneficial if I spend some time in the sauna and lose fluids fast that way. I currently have 3 approaches to using Element products. First is one of their warm beverage options in the morning with my coffee. Sometimes I'll put about half a pack of Element in there. Again, one of their warm beverage options. So usually that's something like chocolate mint, chocolate chai, chocolate raspberry, one of those. A second option is one of their fruity flavors in my water bottles while I'm training. So if I'm out there and I'm going through 16 to 20 ounce bottles of water, I'm going to sprinkle in some of that fruity Element flavors into that in order to account for that 614 milligrams of sodium that I'm going to lose. Third is their newest option, which is their Sparkle product, which is just a 16-ounce carbonated can with the Element electrolyte powder in it already mixed for you. So I've been using these for long runs and before afternoon training sessions in the gym when I know my fluid loss has been high. So I've been doing a lot of long runs lately, and having a can of Sparkle there to kind of sip at in between pit stops in the heat to cool down and rehydrate have been a great new addition to my training lineup. Just a reminder, their core flavors include citrus, watermelon, orange, grapefruit, raspberry, chocolate, mango chili, and chocolate caramel. Some seasonal options include chocolate mint, chocolate chai, and chocolate raspberry. You can go to drinklmnt.com/HPO, throw in that /HPO, and you'll get prompted for a free sample pack with your purchase and help support the Human Performance Outliers podcast along the way. The reason I chose Delta G over other exogenous ketone supplements is they have the formula and the dosage that is supported by the research we have to date. They have the DARPA grant to design for special forces, 50 plus research studies, and 20 plus ongoing studies. They also have approximately 3 times the amount of ketones in their product than many of their competitors do, which can be critical for hitting the ketone target ranges that suggest potential cognitive and performance benefits. I've been playing around with my protocol a bit during this last training block, so it has changed a bit from what prior protocols you may have heard me mention on here. For like longer training sessions, these are going to be the key points that I'm going to do it. So it's going to be lower intensity but long in duration. I like the long runs. I like these for long runs and even ultra specific long runs, which tend to span beyond, say, 3 hours. And the way I will do this is I will take a bottle of Delta G Performance, that's the blue bottle I have on their website, about an hour into that training session. And then if that session goes beyond 3 hours, I will take a second one. If it doesn't, I will still take a second one post long run as a way to kind of kickstart things for whatever's coming up next. If you're interested in hearing more about it, I did record an episode with Brian McMahon. It's episode 351, Exogenous Ketones and Performance. And if you're also interested in checking more out about the product and signing up for a free consultation to find out how it would maybe fit your lifestyle, you can head to deltagketones.com. Feel free to throw in a promo code BITTER20 for 20% off your purchase of Delta G Ketones. Thanks for tuning into this episode of the Human Performance Outliers podcast with Zach Bitter.